President Trump and his administration have launched a new bid to slow the unfolding impeachment inquiry, but it has prompted one top Democrat to accuse the White House of trying to obstruct justice. In a letter tonight, the White House counsel calls the impeachment inquiry, quote, illegitimate, and says the White House will refuse to cooperate with it. This comes after the State Department blocked Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, from speaking to 3 House committees, informing him of that decision just hours before he was scheduled for a deposition today. Ambassador Sondland has become a central figure in the Trump-Ukraine scandal. He is among the 3 diplomats who exchanged potentially damning text messages about a possible effort to leverage the government of Ukraine last summer. And according to Republican Senator Ron Johnson, Sondland told him over the summer that the release of U.S. aid to Ukraine was contingent on Ukraine appointing a prosecutor who would, quote, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. Ambassador Sondland was today served with a subpoena, and House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff made clear that the administration's stonewalling represents obstruction of justice to him.
The failure to produce this witness, the failure to produce these documents, we consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction of the constitutional functions of Congress, a co-equal branch of government.
In a tweet this morning, the president took personal responsibility for the decision, saying, quote, I would love to send Ambassador Sondland to testify, but unfortunately he would be testifying before a totally compromised kangaroo court. Trump also quoted from one of Sondland's texts, which was released last week, to claim vindication. He said, quote, importantly, Ambassador Sondland's tweet stated, the president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. That says it all. This is part of a counteroffensive the president is waging to stop the momentum Democrats have gained. All of it comes amid new reporting as well from the New York Times about Trump's call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. According to a memo that was written by the whistleblower, a White House official described the call as crazy, frightening, and completely lacking in substance related to national security. The whistleblower describes the official as, quote, visibly shaken by what had transpired, and says that, quote, in the official's view, the president had clearly committed a criminal act. NBC has confirmed the existence of the memo and the accuracy of the Times description of it. Joining me now, Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. He is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Susan Del Percio is a Republican strategist, and Jeff Bennett, a White House correspondent for NBC News. And Jeff, let me just start with you to take us through. The day began with Ambassador Sondland apparently being told, no, you're not going to be giving that deposition today. And the day is ending with the White House now putting out this document, this letter, saying they're not going to cooperate on anything. What is going on here in terms of the White House's thinking?
Well, and if you read the letter, Steve, it actually reads like more of a political document than a legal one. So it appears the White House is trying to give Republican allies of President Trump some talking points to use in his defense as they try to run out the clock here. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has made clear that this argument made by the White House has no legal ground. It's not based on the Constitution. It's certainly not based in House precedent. And so what we've heard from her, what we've heard from Adam Schiff, is that in the face of any more stonewalling, House Democrats aren't going to seek legal remedy through the courts. What they're going to do is chalk that up as a new potential avenue, another article of impeachment, congressional obstruction. And then beyond that, Adam Schiff says they're going to draw an adverse inference. That is, if the White House won't give them documents on a given subject, they will assume that the underlying evidence, the underlying claim is true. They will take that stonewalling to be some sort of confirmation. On the Sondland point, which I think is fairly instructive, is that, and as you mentioned, my colleagues and I confirmed today that during a 5-hour gap, there was a 5-hour gap during which Bill Taylor, a diplomat, and Sondland were communicating about this quid pro quo, this holding up of Ukrainian military aid in exchange for President Trump's desire to have the Ukrainians dig up discredited dirt on Joe Biden. We have now confirmed that in that 5-hour window that Sondland communicated directly with President Trump, and now today President Trump is now echoing what Sondland said in that text message back, where he said, in effect, no, there's no such thing. There is no quid pro quo, Steve.
Well, we have actually with us a member of one of the committees now, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, that has subpoenaed Sondland to testify and to appear for a deposition. Now, next Wednesday is what you're saying. By next Wednesday, to be deposed, to provide documents. If this posture from the White House, which shows no signs of relenting, if that continues, if he doesn't show up next Wednesday, if these documents don't come forward, what is the next step?
The next step is this, what Chairman Schiff said. Look, enough is enough. If, in fact, he wants to continue to obstruct, then we will say he's obstructing the fundamental rights of Congress to do its job. And then that will become part of the impeachment. It will no longer have to worry about an impeachment inquiry if, in fact, he is not cooperating and he's intentionally trying to cover up his behavior.
Does that, when you say it will become part of the impeachment, would this then be an article that would be fast-tracked on its own, perhaps in an effort to compel cooperation, or would this play out along with the other?
No, I think that this would be an item that could be fast-tracked on its own, on its face. It is clear that he is trying to obstruct and prevent the Congress from getting information that it needs to do its work. And as a result of that, it's a separate and independent count of impeachment, in my opinion. And then you look at other areas of impeachment also, if he continues to obstruct and does not come up with anything that refutes what the facts are.
So the discussion here that's been playing out, Republicans have been making an issue of saying, hey, House Democrats have not had a formal vote in the House to have an impeachment inquiry launched. They've said the impeachment inquiry is underway. The committees are investigating. There are no individual articles that have been introduced yet. But are you saying if Sondland doesn't show next Wednesday, there'll be an article of impeachment that's then introduced?
I'm saying they could very well. That is the next step. That's where we have to move to. If, in fact, you obstruct the investigation, the inquiry, then we have to look at what's left. What is happening? He is then obstructing the impeachment inquiry. And so now we look as part of articles of impeachment obstruction. That becomes one of those articles, as well as others that we can look at. And as Chairman Schiff has indicated, if he does nothing other than that, then we will have to infer that the facts as we see them is what they are. So you believe your own eyes of betrayal, of his trust as President of the United States, of the fact that he has endangered the national security of the United States of America, and that he's abused his power as President of the United States of America.
Well, Susan, what do you make of this? Because now the threat is here. You're hearing it from a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. If the ambassador does not show up next week, does not cooperate, they are now saying this becomes an article of impeachment, obstruction of Congress. What do you make of a calculation by the White House, surely aware that that is likely going to happen if they do this, choosing to embrace that route rather than have him show up and testify?
Well, I'm still a little unclear. If he refuses to show up, Congressman, will that be part of a number of counts of impeachment, or will it be a separate count that you will, as Steve asked, fast track and use it to kind of hold over the president's head? Because if it's separate, I think that's, from a communications point of view, not a legislative one, but a communications one, that would be a mistake, because that's just kind of muddying the waters a little bit about why we're going after the president. I think that they have to do their investigation, present whatever they're going to do. Obstruction makes sense. The quid pro quo makes sense. Have that and keep it as clean as possible, because what the president does, he denies, he delays, he deflects. And right now we're getting perilously close to having a conversation about process versus what he did. And that's where I think the focus has to stand.
Well, arguing that the impeachment inquiry is, quote, illegitimate, the White House letter to Pelosi says this: given that your inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, any pretense of fairness, or even the most elementary due process protections, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it. it. Tonight, the White House's argument is facing criticism from both Democrats and at least one Republican. The former general counsel to Republican Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, quote, "Wow, this letter is bananas, a barely lawyered temper tantrum, a middle finger to Congress and its oversight responsibilities." As a result of the White House letter, Democrats will presumably have to fight to get the White House to respond to any of their subpoena requests. And today's subpoena to Ambassador Sondland is the sixth issued since Speaker Pelosi announced the impeachment inquiry just 2 weeks ago. Jeff, let me bring you back in on this. Just again, you were mentioning this. This reads like a political document. We're always saying impeachment's a political process, not a legal one. Ultimately, it's a jury of senators, if it gets that far, that would decide the president's fate. It's the House that would impeach. This can be read, then, you're saying, as this is the White House's attempt to equip Republicans with a political sort of line of attack?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the trial balloon that the White House floated on Friday when they first suggested that this letter was coming was that they were going to say that if the House Speaker doesn't bring this impeachment vote to the floor, they weren't going to cooperate. This letter does not use that phrase. It stops short of making that point. I think because Republicans got the message that if Nancy Pelosi were to bring an impeachment vote to the floor, it would also put Republicans on the record, and that was something that they didn't want to do. So yes, it does read like a bit of a political screed here, but to Susan's point, Nancy Pelosi has already said that what's already in the public record, as this investigation goes forward, even if they don't get another diplomat to show up, if they don't get the documents that they want, that what's already in the public record, but President Trump has already admitted to, is enough of an impeachable offense. The president trying to use his public office for personal gain, the president undermining national security, risking the integrity of American elections. That is the public case. That is the argument that the Democrats are trying to build, and they feel like they already have the evidence they need to do that, including, Steve, President Trump's own comments.
Congressman, Jeff mentions this. It's in that letter to the Speaker. The White House making the point, Democrats in the House have sort of decreed that there's an impeachment inquiry going on. There's not been a formal House vote to authorize it. You had a formal House vote with Clinton in '98. There was a formal House vote with Nixon in '74. You're not required to do it, but that's been the custom, at least in modern times. We're going to show some of the polling in a little bit, but it looks like the consensus in the polling right now is there is support out there for an impeachment inquiry. Do you want Democrats to essentially call the White House's bluff and say, fine, let's have that vote, impeachment inquiry?
What we're not going to do is allow the individual who is subject to the investigation to tell us how to investigate. We're going to do our jobs and what we're trying to do in a very serious manner, because we're in a very serious time, is to make sure that we give the White House the opportunity to produce documents, if he has those documents, and show that there's no need to impeach him for what is obvious to us, an abuse of his power, a threat to national security, and a betrayal of the Constitution based upon his actions. So absent that, then what choice do we have but when I do say, Susan, I am talking about all three. Obstruction becomes one of the counts that would be included therein, with the same thing that we talked about as far as betrayal, abuse of power, and national security interests. Those would all be compiled therein. That's what we have to do. It's a serious time, and we're not going to allow the president to act as if he is one of those authoritarians who he seems to embrace.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.